And again, pancreas today. So, located in the illustration, in the picture, there's a head and a tail to it. Tail goes off toward the spleen, and the head of it is right in the crook of the duodenum. So on a figure like this, you should spend a little bit of time and see what you can recognize. Well, they're showing the duodenum. The stomach has been cut. So here is the opening to the duodenum, and there is the exit of the duodenum. Short section, and the head of the pancreas is nestled right in that fold, right in that crook of the duodenum. Produces, it's part of the digestive system, one of those accessory structures, produces about 1.2 to 1.5 liters of pancreatic juice a day. It is also under both neural and hormonal control. Also, the details of that I'm not going to go through. And there are lots of digestive enzymes in that pancreatic juice. So if you remember the 4 classes of biological molecules from 160, see if you can rattle those off or write those down. Remember the 4 basic classes of biomolecules or biological molecules. We had carbs, carbohydrates, we had proteins, we had lipids, and we had nucleic acids. You eat all of that in your diet. You eat other organisms that used to be alive, and they had the same category of biological molecules as all life. So you have digestive enzymes to break down all of those basic categories of biological molecules. You have proteases, which digest proteins, and lipases, which digest lipids. So proteins, lipases for lipids, amylase for starch, and nucleases for DNA and RNA. And if you're eating food that hasn't been horribly processed, you're eating DNA and RNA from other organisms. So you have digestive enzymes, all of that in the pancreatic juice. And lots of bicarbonate is produced. And that is necessary to neutralize the low pH of contents coming right out of the stomach. So the stomach has been cut, but the stomach contents enter the duodenum, and the pancreatic juice enters at this point also and neutralizes the stomach contents before it burns a hole in the intestines. While you're looking at this slide, to learn just some basic anatomy and to kind of familiarize yourself and review it, what else do you see in the picture that you can recognize? You can put labels on. Well, you should be able to recognize the kidneys, of course. I'll just draw some yellow dots left and right. And you also see some of this membrane that's been cut away. There's a little cut edge, and it covers the kidneys, and the kidneys are behind this membrane. So this is the peritoneum that's been cut. Again, the kidneys are retroperitoneal, and this is where a piece of the ascending colon was, which was also wrapped behind part of that peritoneum. Likewise, on the left side of the body, here's that same membrane, that same peritoneal membrane that was cut. And this is where part of the descending colon was, so you can recognize that. The bladder, and you should recognize and be able to identify that blood vessel. And maybe this blood vessel, or these two. What else can we see here? Here are the hepatic veins that have been cut. When the liver was removed. What about this structure here? It's your celiac trunk. So when you see pictures like this, images, if you just spend a little bit of time reviewing what you are just looking at them and trying to identify as much as you can. Here is the esophagus that was cut and where the stomach was removed. And then you should also be able to identify, we'll stop here pretty quick, but what about this blood vessel? Is that the aorta? No. That one has a little label going to it. Some of these labels you can actually read. And if you want to play around with this kind of figure, if you're viewing this slide in PowerPoint, so go to the slides that I gave you where the same pictures aren't all cluttered up with my drawing and my doodling. Open the PowerPoint, not the PDF, but with the PowerPoint you can zoom in, magnify it, and the images are generally pretty high. They're high enough resolution where you should be able to zoom in without losing a lot of detail. So let's move on. Still on the pancreas. So there's the tail off to the right and the head of the pancreas nestled in against the curvature of the duodenum. And most of the pancreas is exocrine. So you remember the difference between exocrine versus endocrine. Exocrine glands produce secretions that go outside the body. They go on to epithelial surfaces. Such as the lumen of the duodenum. And endocrine glands secrete their products into the blood. Okay, So most of the pancreas is exocrine, produces the pancreatic juice that we just talked about, and there is a network of ducts running through the pancreas that are collecting this pancreatic juice. And then that pancreatic juice then exits out into the duodenum. And the common bile duct, we'll take a look at that shortly, is bringing bile down, and it also enters the small intestine. And this little swelling here is the hepatopancreatic ampulla. So again, the bicarbonate in the pancreatic juice neutralizes the chyme from the stomach. And this is the liquid stomach contents. And it restarts chemical digestion, because much of the chemical digestion stopped in the stomach except for protein digestion, but that was occurring at low pH, and now as those enzymes exit the stomach and the pH increases back up to closer to neutral, those digestive enzymes in the stomach, those gastric proteases, are no longer effective. They're denatured. They change their shape. They're at a different pH now. And other proteases, the pancreatic proteases, are then introduced to continue the chemical digestion. Same idea with the starch that began in the mouth, stopped in the stomach, and then restarts in the small intestines. Next slide, and the last one for the pancreas, is looking at the endocrine portion of the pancreas. So about 1% of the pancreas is endocrine, and that involves these little clusters of cells. They stain a little bit differently. They stain a little bit lighter, and these are referred to as the islets of Langerhans. Islets are clusters of endocrine cells. There are 4 different types of endocrine cells, and we're only looking at 2 of them. So the beta cells within those islets produce the insulin. And insulin, you know, lowers blood sugar. So it's these beta cells that produce the insulin. It goes into the blood and then stimulates body cells to absorb glucose out of the blood and store it in the cell. There are also alpha cells in the pancreas, and alpha cells produce the antagonistic hormone glucagon. And glucagon raises the blood sugar levels. So the target for insulin was most body cells. To absorb insulin from the blood. The target for glucagon is primarily the liver. and that raises blood sugar level. So glycogen is stored in the liver, glucagon causes the breakdown of glycogen into glucagon. Let's say stimulates conversion of glycogen to glucose. And that, of course, goes into the blood and increases blood sugar. Okay. And that's enough of the pancreas.